Hello and welcome to the September 11th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal alongside Mike Hogan and with today's very special guest, Bob Nastanovich. How you doing today, guys?
I'm doing well.
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Good to see you
Yeah,
back
it's always one of those things.
in person. You know, it's Bob. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast much, but this guy's been in Saratoga for the summer, and I've been stuck in the Manhattan office. So I haven't seen him in like 3 months, 2 months.
2 months I've been away, more or less. It's good to be back in the city. Very briefly, going to be going on another trip next week, but we'll talk about that when the time comes in our one show next week, where Matt Bernier will return, and we'll have the three of us before I go on my next racing-related and DRF-related adventure. So that'll be fun. But today, we've talked about this pretty much since the pod started a year ago, that we wanted to do an edition of the show that focused a little bit on music. And even at some point early on, the idea had come up, we'd make some obscure musical reference and even say on the podcast, well, you know, I think the Venn diagram of people who get that joke, Mike, is me, you, and the guy from Pavement.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So,
horse racing and underground rock and roll don't cross paths very often, I've noticed.
Have you seen anyone else on the musical side of things, though, Bob, that shares your appreciation for what goes on in the ovals?
Well, trainer Tony Reinstedler, who's I guess now semi-retired, is a hardcore music fan. That guy, in fact, one of the reasons why I kind of pretty much quit training was to follow bands. So he's heavily enthusiastic. But as far as like, you guys know Tony, he was up at Saratoga.
Yeah,
he was
of course.
At,
yeah. He won many races up there.
Whitewater rafting place. Oh yeah, he's a great guy. He stopped training because his barn dwindled to just a handful of horses. So then he went to work for Adena Springs in Florida. And pretty much, if you're going to see anybody from racing at a hip concert, it's going to be Tony. But one thing I've kind of always noticed about horse racing is that people are entirely unaware of indie rock and underground music for the most part. You know, I mean, Marcus Hirsch, I think he knows a little bit. You know, I think he's a bit of an enthusiast, but
you know what?
It's nice to separate.
Have you talked music with Matt Haggerty?
No, I have not. Nor I know Dave Bernard's pretty hip too.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I just ran, DRF Formulator on Twitter. Some people know that that's me. Some people think it's just a brand, faceless, and so I tweeted out, having.
I thought it was.
Yeah, right, yeah, and that's kind of what it was at first until folks like Pete lured the personality out. I tweeted out something about the walk to work is particularly interesting when you have like Plastic Ono Band on shuffle with Nick Lowe and John Wayne's Texas Funeral, and the only response I got was Matt Haggerty saying, "Oh my God, Texas Funeral! I haven't heard that record in 10 years. And we wore that out driving around northern Arizona." So I think the Venn diagram
That's excellent form for that.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. I mean,
really good form.
Twitter people with Twitter accounts that have heard Texas Funeral, the Venn diagram of that has to be about 10. So the fact that one of them is even in horse racing is amazing.
It's pretty funny. Bob,
for you, relatively obscure there for sure.
Absolutely. For you, Bob, which passion developed first, music or horse racing?
Pretty much simultaneous as a teenager. Gambling's, is kind of really got me interested in horse racing.
Not an uncommon tale.
And I started buying records. Yeah. It's interesting to sort of work in the game in so many different capacities now. And I'm not a horseman by any means, and I work 7 jobs out here at the track, but none of them have to do with actually handling horses. But anyways, I started buying records when I was 13. And you guys were talking about doing radio shows earlier. I first had a radio show at University of Richmond. I was fortunate to have one when I was 16, and then I was the station manager at University of Virginia when I was there in the 80s. Yeah, and we used to like drive up to Charleston all the time and blow all the money that we made working in the record store, you know. And before it was a racino, I washed dishes and drove a bus and worked in a record store. So when I should have been going to class, and then when I graduated from school in '89 and moved to New York, I was a bus driver in New York and pretty much spent all my free time at Aqueduct in Belmont. Worked it, and then it was one of the greatest things I did. I'd get up in the morning, and before I started right when I started my route, right when I got my bus, I'd go to the old OTB over on I think it was like a 33rd and 2nd, and park a bus outside of it and run in and place all my bets in the OTB there for the day, and then listen to the results on WFAN throughout the course of the day would kind of make or break my shift. So, yeah, it's been a great 35-year ride. Hey, it's landed me here, so it's
Yeah.
it's good times, you know.
Fantastic. As a performer,
Yeah, no. So as a teenager, you know, kind of like your ideas are sort of formed as a teenager, you know, so you kind of get hooked on stuff. So for me, record collecting and betting on horses. Kind of,
I can't think of too many better passions personally. You know, both of them
And
occupy most of my time up to the present moment.
Well, depending on the records, maybe some of
you're
them
doing
may be
better than I.
profitable.
As you mentioned earlier, judging by Peter's tan, he's doing better than both of us. Looks pretty fantastic over there.
That's just a result of early morning tennis. There's another weird little connection. There's a lot of horsemen tennis players, and I happen to be fortunate enough to be friends with a few of them.
Really?
So they get me out and up pretty early up there in Saratoga.
Who's the top of the tree amongst because I played a lot of tennis when I was a kid. I won't play for less than $100 now, but who's good at tennis and horse racing?
That's a very good question. There's one guy who's an owner for Hibiscus Stables, actually one of our Twitter pals too, Mike Moscato. He's actually a tennis pro, so I'm going to give him the #1 nod.
Wow.
And now it's an excuse. I'll make him listen to the podcast too. But he'll give you the whole rundown. He has a vision of doing some sort of charity pro-am with racing and with racing and tennis. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far. I want to talk to you about how you made the transition. You know, there's plenty of people like us who spend a lot of time, collecting records and listening to music as kids. You know, we didn't end up becoming famous rock and roll musicians ourselves. How did you make that leap? What was the story there?
I was fortunate enough that one of my best friends in college was Stephen Malkmus, and the guy is insanely talented. Okay,
for sure.
And he's a brilliant songwriter, and he's a great guitarist. So, and then another one of my best friends is a guy named David Berman, who's a really, really good poet. And so you just kind of, you're 18, 19 years old, and you realize that you're surrounded by these abundantly talented people. And so your role as a good friend of theirs is to try to make them as good as they can possibly be, really. And that kind of led to Pavement and Silver Jews, you know, my friendship with those guys. As far as Pavement goes, I was sort of originally intended to be the tour manager. And the guy, Gary Young, who's a kind of a brilliant Keith Moon-like drummer that we had at the start of the band, he struggled with drinking, you know. And so basically Steven said, I'm going to need you to keep time. And one thing led to another. I kind of ended up in the band, and then, you know, my role changed throughout actually the reason why I actually sort of raised my profile in terms of being in Pavement was I did a lot of the vocal parts that Steven didn't want to do. And, you know, just when you kind of end up in something, you end up sort of like, bands are sort of, and I never really thought about being in a band. I just kind of ended up in one, you know. What I'd like to do is watch bands. So, you know, and then you watch your heroes, and then you learn from them and stuff like that. But it was amazing to end up actually in a band, and then with people out in the crowd, and then it was bizarre. To me, it was bizarre. But I had a blast. I was extremely fortunate, just really, really fortunate. It was a great way to go through your 20s, traveling the world, going to see horse races all over England, Ireland, Australia, Japan, and playing rock shows, so I wouldn't trade it. It was a truly wonderful experience. And then after Pavement stopped in '99, the respect and praise that's been lavished upon us has just been, really fantastic. So no complaints on that, and rock and roll's been very good to me.
That's great. Tell me how you got from that unscheduled bus stop on 2nd Avenue, making your bets for the day at OTB, to working in the racing industry. I think that's something a lot of the listeners would love to hear, is how you go from being a player to a player.
Yeah, no, I mean, I drove a bus starting in '89, then I was a terminal manager. Then Pavement sort of, got me out of working for several years. And then when the band stopped in '99, I had to figure out something to do. During this time, I started to claim horses, which is kind of taking, your horse playing a step further. Like, for example, I live out here in Des Moines, and, I tell this kind of story often, but, prominent owner Maggie Moss lives pretty close by. I see her in the grocery store and stuff, and she says, "Oh, no, I don't gamble. I'm not into gambling. I can't even tell you what a trifecta is," and, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, "Maggie, you're one of the biggest gamblers I know. You own 80 horses, or that might be down now a little bit." But so I started claiming them. At one point I had 12, which was insane it must have been the poorest owner in Kentucky with, over 10 horses. And then, because I moved there, I was living in New York, and, I was paving. I was like, there's no point living in New York. So I moved to Louisville, and I got a little cottage directly across the street from the clubhouse entrance of Churchill Downs. And it kind of became a hovel or a squat. I'd say during the time that I owned that house, over 100 different people lived in there. It was kind of a post-race lounge. It wasn't the cleanest place. Actually, I sold it to trainer Grant Forster. He's there now. He won the New Orleans Handicap this year. He's had a great career as a trainer.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, so Pavement stopped, and I needed a job. And it's hard to get jobs in racing, to be honest with you. I've sent resumes everywhere, and it's hard to get jobs in racing offices. It really is total networking type thing. I was friends at the time with Greta Kunzweiler, jockey, and she knocked on my door one day, and she said, "Do you want to be my agent?" I didn't really know what a jockey agent was. I'd heard of Doc Danner was Pat Day's agent, or Fred Amy was Shane Seller's agent. I just knew them as these people. I didn't really know what agenting was. I was like, well, what is that? And 3 days later, I'm standing at Keeneland in the racing office, kind of surrounded by a who's who of jock agents, and got kind of tossed into the fire. So I hustled, looked for a few years for Greta, and Joe Johnson, and a guy named Felix Ortiz fired me. That was kind of a funny thing about being a jockey agent. You realize that you're fired when you show up and you see your jockey walking around with another agent. It's that kind of pure of a firing. They don't actually, there's no advance warning. They just, but, so anyways, that sort of dried up, but I don't think I was particularly good at being a jockey agent. I just don't think I'm deceptive enough. Let's, kind of put it that way. I'm not the kind of guy that can kind of
hey, spinning is
I'm not
part
the
of the
kind
game.
of guy that can really I know I'm uncomfortable with that, because I think if you've been a horse owner, and even dumber thing for somebody who's not rich than being a horse owner is being a horse breeder, and I did that to the tune of 15 horses, and that's really what got me in the hole. I did sort of want to mention one thing about racing this weekend that really intrigues me is this horse that's going to run in the Iroquois. This horse, Expected Ruler. You guys familiar with this horse? He won the Tyro first out at Monmouth.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've
You know the
seen
story
some
of
of
this
that
guy?
tape.
I don't know this guy, but it's
the trainer's very young.
breeder
I
owner
think.
trainer.
Yeah, he's like 20.
He's breeder owner trainer. Okay,
Yeah.
so and he enters his horse first time out in the Tyro and wins it like 47-1. Now, that's what I wanted to happen to me. Okay, so like whoever this guy, Liam Benson is his name, and
He's
he's
on
got,
Twitter.
looks like he's pretty live to win the Iroquois. Yeah, and he's so he must be cool. And but he's got this son of Leroy de Animo, you know. So that's what I wanted to happen to me. It never really did. Fortunately, anyways, I fell apart as a jockey agent, and I've never gotten a call from a jockey saying, "Hey, man, why don't you come out of retirement?" So I must have really not been very good. I must have been brutal. And then I ran into a guy at Del Mar named Heath Belvar, as a chart caller for Equibase. I'm pretty sure he's part of the crew at Saratoga. Those guys write a long chart.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
They
Tired of certain commentators calling them out for missing things. They now write novels.
Have you by any chance read the chart for Jess's Dreams debut win? It's like
I have not gotten around to that.
It's good
They're
reading.
brilliant.
It's good reading when you have a chance.
Wordsmiths. They're cool. I'm a chart caller. Those guys are wordsmiths. But anyway, so Heath said, look, you know, like, and this is kind of the way things work in horse racing. I've noticed. He's like, look, you know, he was doing it at the Texas circuit at the time. He said, I think Prairie Meadows needs a chart caller. So he contacted the supervisor. I really stunk at it for the first week, and Chuck Scaravilli, who was in charge of Equibase at the time, somehow gave me the thumbs up and the go-ahead. I am to Prairie Meadows. Then you know, Marcus says, hey, I don't want to you want to cover Prairie Meadows, and then a couple of jobs in the racing office opened up, and then I got a call from Thorograph. They wanted to start covering Prairie Meadows, so one thing leads to another, and you end up working 65 hours a week in this game, you know, and it's, you know, it's great. But I stopped. I'm very fortunate in that one of the last horses that I bred is a filly called Hercilia, and she's now won 11 races and over $200,000, mostly on the sprinting on the turf at Indiana Grand. And so I actually feel like I succeeded in that mission of, at least I bred one good horse, you know, and I sold her for $5,000. My wife always says, well, why'd you sell that one? So we really needed the money at the time, you know. You know what I mean?
Still get
so anyways,
checks?
that's about kind of how it is. The one thing leads to another.
As the breeder, do you still get checks for her wins?
Yeah, you get. Yeah.
So that's, you know, there's
yeah,
that. At
yeah,
least.
they're small. Yeah, no, thank you for looking on the bright side. I appreciate that. But I still own bits and pieces of horses. I got 10% of a broodmare and a foal out in California at this beautiful place, and I got little tiny shares of Ohio breds. I'll get back in as soon as I cash a bet. I'll get back in. I can't stand being out.
If anybody thinks
I got to get
Bob
something,
is,
you know.
if anybody thinks Bob is exaggerating about the amount of jobs he has, he is not. When we were working together a little bit to promote the Prairie Meadows contest earlier in the year, I remember calling you for a quote for the article at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, and you were out there. I could hear the stopwatch ticking in the background. I think they had you clocking horses that day, or so. I mean, it is an amazing devotion to racing that you have to be making this work, and it's great to hear about the full breadth of your resume in the sport. And we haven't even gotten around to really talking about the handicapping stuff, which we're going to get to in a few minutes here when we move on to the public handicapper races. But before we do that, I want to talk to Mike a little bit, because I think people have been listening to the show for a year now, some of you out there anyway, at least that's what they tell me when they come and accost me at the paddock bar. But people I don't think fully know about, Mike, your background in music, and especially not as a performer, but sort of on the other side of things, as, I don't know if you ever were involved in the production side, but having a label of your own. What was the story there? How did that get off the ground?
There are probably 5 people that know me as a performer in a couple really awful bands that played a few shows in the Portland area. many years ago, but it's probably best forgotten. But I grew up in Southern California, and as a kid growing up in the 80s, I mean, Bob and Pete, I'm sure you can relate to this. Pete, maybe a little less so with your dad having so much access to the music that you did. It wasn't like we have now where you could go into YouTube and listen to any song you want if you've heard of a band. I'd hear about, the Ramones and the Clash and, all these bands. I didn't have any friends that had the albums. I was reading magazines, I was reading Spin, I was reading even some of the more obscure fanzines, and I'd read a record review or hear about a band. And my friends and I would be like, okay, you buy this record, I'll buy this record. And we'd buy things sight unseen, and so that's kind of how I got into music. And then when I went to college in the late 80s, Santa Clara in the Bay Area, first thing I did was I went into the radio station, and yeah, sure, I wanted to do a show, but for me it was more having access to this huge record library of all these bands that I'd heard about but never had a chance to listen to.
That was a big deal back in the day, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, because otherwise the only way I would ever hear them is if I was lucky enough to know someone who had a record, or I would just buy something, buy a Minutemen record because I've heard the Minutemen, buy a Husker Du record. There's no other way for me to hear this stuff,
Was there a particular eureka moment for you where you went from being a music fan to somebody who wanted to get more involved?
So it's funny, and Bob, I ended up starting a record label and running a record label for a little while. It was a very small label. It's called Little Brother Records. Put out maybe 15 records. Probably best known for
I had one called Broker's Tip.
Broker Tip?
Yeah, I had a record label called Broker's Tip. I think.
Broker's
Tip. Yeah, he's the winner of the Fighting Finnish Derby.
There you
go.
go.
I was going to say, I know that name.
There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody knows my label, they probably know it for maybe two things. I put out a couple Nels Cline records, but I also put out a Minutemen tribute record that had a whole bunch of bands. I had Meat Puppets and Sparkalepsy, your buddy Jason Lowenstein, and I put out a Lou Barlow record. But the way I got from music fan into actually doing something more seriously is I was a huge Minutemen fan, loved the Minutemen. And in the late 80s,
fans of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they wrote like 250 songs, and maybe clock in at 400 minutes total. But that doesn't matter.
That's kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly. One of the most prolific bands and best bands. It really kind of inspired me, and the whole do-it-yourself ethic was all that. That's what they were about. For me, that's like, you don't have to go study music at Juilliard. Just start a band yourself. Do it if you want to.
Very pure rock and roll ethos going on there from my
end.
Right.
They were freakishly talented people.
Oh my God!
I mean,
yeah,
all three of them. George has been incredible drummer, George Hurley, and Mike Watt. My God, amazing. And of course, Dennis. I didn't really to me, was changed the face of rock and roll when he passed away. It was a horrible tragedy. But anyways, enough about them. They were, obviously double nickels on the dime, but everything. Do you ever see them live? Do you have
I never did. I was 14.
Stories about that.
Yeah, I was 14 when D. Boone died. So I saw Firehose quite a bit, which wasn't quite the same. But yeah, I mean, I was just a huge fan.
Were great. You could get the intensity was similar.
Yeah, right. And again, they didn't act like rock stars. They didn't act like they were any different from you. And Mike Watt has people would go up and be like, can you sign this? And he'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm just like you. I'm not a star. I don't have any time for that crap. And not in a way to make you feel bad, but in a way to make you feel like, okay.
Not in a big league way, in a relatable human being way.
Right.
What did you deal when you did that tribute record? What sort of dealings did you have?
So going back into how I got into it was. I was at the radio station I was a music director for a little while, and I had friends in bands, and I had a friend at a record label. And there were all these, at the time, there were all these tribute records coming out. And
that became a thing.
That became a thing for a bit. And I just mentioned to a friend, I was like, oh, there's all these tribute records. Someone should do a Minutemen tribute record. Just, that was the conversation. 2 sentences. About a month later, I had 3 different bands come up to me and say, hey, I'm recording a song for your tribute record. What? What do you mean?
Pretty cool.
And so all of a sudden, I had these songs, and I was like, well, I guess maybe I'll actually try to do it. So, 2.5 years later, and something like, I don't know, I had like 50 songs to choose from, ended up putting this thing out. And it was really just a handshake deal. It was just like, hey, do you want to record a song? I mean, I talked to Kurt Cobain. He was interested. Never, another tragedy in music never ended up happening. It would just mention, even people that didn't know me, would just be like, hey, get a hold of my number. Like, hey, I want to record a song. That's how I met Nels Cline. Like, I don't know who are you? And he's just some random guy that was working at a record store, actually at an art book store, and playing music in L.A. And that's how I met. It just helped. And back in that time, it was a lot harder to get in touch with people. You just had to know somebody that had a phone number for Thurston Moore or whatever, and everybody was always just very receptive to the idea. And so it just, one thing led to another, and I had all these songs and ended up putting the album out. And at the time, D. Boone's dad was really sick, and so the way I wanted to do it, and I knew Mike Watt, again, his whole approach of like, I'm not a star, it's like I wanted to do it as a tribute to D. Boone, and I wanted to use some of his artwork as the cover, and I wanted to do it as a way to help D. Boone's dad, who was pretty sick at the time. So didn't make much money, but what little I made, I ended up sending as a check to him. And so, that was kind of it, and then it led to a few other records that I ended up putting out.
I think you're too nice of a guy to be a jockey agent, too. Definitely stay away from.
Probably.
See, I lie easily and often, so that might be my next career move.
Probably. But
that's what you want to do.
Kidding, of course. Lots of friends who are jockey agents.
Bob, I'm going to ask you a question. I saw Pavement once in 90, I want to guess 91. It was right before Slanted and Enchanted came out. And definitely Gary was still the drummer. But were you in the band? It was at the Kennel Club. And it was
Absolutely.
You remember that show?
Sebadoh and with that band from Boston. What was the name of that band from Boston? It was Sebadoh, us, and some other band that was kind of bigger. They were forgettable.
Yeah, it wasn't Buffalo Tom,
but us and
was
Sebadoh, we weren't. Yeah, I was there. Yeah, it was them. They were a pretty good band. It was them. Okay. You're right.
Okay. Yeah.
And but anyways, I was there. But when Gary was in the band, back then, about half the songs, if he was on, right, I didn't have to play, so he might have been on that night. So I would probably just been standing on stage having several beers.
He may have been. The main thing I remember about the show was that he was. I mean, it was before Slanted and Enchanted came out, but there was a huge buzz around the album. Matador was behind it.
Oh, yeah.
It was just like huge. I'm sure. Obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but for a band that had never even released an album, I think it was sold out. And Gary was out in front and was like, "I can't believe everybody's here to see me!" And he was shaking everyone's hand as you walked in. That's the thing I remember most about the show. Yeah.
I think Gary really kind of separated us that era of Pavement. He was vital because, we had good songs and stuff, but Gary was so weird. He was so out there, and he was so engaging. And he's a very lovely man, but to be quite frank, he's an absolute freak.
Yeah.
So he was kind of our secret weapon, and if we just had like another dude our age playing drums, then we probably wouldn't have been as exceptional. So I think he's really vital to our success as a band. Plus, the guy was an unbelievable drummer when he was on. He was you can mention Keith Moon in the same breath, but then when he was off, and by off I mean intoxicated. Then it sounded like he was drumming with like 2 pencils, So
right.
Maybe
a little like
he's doing great.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah, he's got a cottage industry now. He makes shock mounts. He makes these things that affordable things that hold studio mics, and he makes them in his house. It's called shock mount. Yeah,
Cool.
he's an amazing inventor. His father was an amazing scientist. His father actually built the communication towers on top of the World Trade Center towers. Not to mention that on September 11th, but yeah, his father was like in Mad Magazine as like a genius scientist. He invented the compound. Do you remember those horrible Steinberger guitars? Those really creepy guitars. They're black. They're made out of graphite. They're indestructible. You remember these things are really ugly?
I don't.
He invented. He and another guy invented those. He kind of invented the compound that went into making those. So Gary comes from a long line of like scientists, and like, despite all of his efforts, his brain sort of maintained its power, which is pretty remarkable. And he's still out there doing stuff. He's great. But
talent,
no, Pavement.
The combination of talent and manic energy lend a lot, especially on the performance side. That there's a tension that you can't. Bands can make the mistake sometimes, I think, of getting too polished in their live act, and like that's not really for me the energy I'm looking for. To have that you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and to have somebody who's kind of on the edge in there, I don't know. That to me kind of potentially gives a performance a shot in the arm, especially when you're talking about rock and roll music.
It's sort of that mix of brilliance and unpredictability. I don't know if this is a fair analogy, but maybe a little bit like Shane MacGowan. Where
David Yao, are you a fan of him?
Oh yeah, sure. Jesus Lizard, Scratch Acid,
that kind of guy. Yeah. But yeah, Shane MacGowan. Wow.
Shane MacGowan.
He's all right.
The one time I saw the Pogues was on their U.S. tour.
I saw him once.
Yeah, so you may remember the tour. I saw him at the Warfield.
Yeah.
I saw him at the Warfield in San Francisco. At the airport to leave to come to America. Shane was so drunk he collapsed and couldn't make the trip, so they ended up. So that was the good news, bad news. I heard. Okay, we're right. We're going to go see the Pogues, and the bad news is Shane's not going to be the singer. So it was like, oh, bummer. The good news is, they got Joe Strummer as the
not a bad pinch hitter
as the replacement. Yeah. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
That was kind of Shane's
when
bag.
When one of us bowed out, we didn't have all-star replacements, unfortunately. Where was Nels Klein when I needed him?
Yeah, right. Or maybe a Paul Westerberg might be another. One of the times I saw the replacements, he was so angry at his guitar that kept shorting out. It's the only time I've ever seen a musician smash their instrument and it not seem like rock and roll, like showmanship. He was legitimately like so pissed off that he was just like, I'm done, threw it down, walked off.
Yeah. They can be real brats, those guys.
Yeah, that's definitely the we sort of run through the all-star never know what you'll. I guess I'll throw in Van Morrison as one more you'll never know what you get performer directly related to the BAC level.
Sure.
Yeah,
all right, I guess
old school.
At some point here, we should talk about these races. I mean, we feel like we've barely scratched the surface talking about music stuff.
Keep on with the music, because these races, they're hard.
We're gonna put your feet to the fire here in a minute. We'll start off by talking about the Natalma at Woodbine. I'll let Mike kick it off, since you've already, Bob, avowed your opinion that it's tricky. But did you have anything strong in here? I had one I kind of liked, though it might just be a morning line issue.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we're going the same direction. These are the kinds of races I love. These 2-year-olds that are trying something new for the first time. Many of them are trying turf for the first time. I think nearly all of them are trying, with the exception of Silky Girl, trying a route for the first time. So I always like to lean on who. Obviously you want to see how they've run in the races where they have run, but who, from a pedigree standpoint, maybe seems to want the stretch out and want the surface. And some of the shorter priced ones, you've got Karen, who's 3 for 3 sprinting on the synth. Her siblings were essentially dirt synth sprinters, and so at a short price, I'm kind of against her stretching out. And the same goes for the outside one. She'll Do It, who was certainly impressive in the debut, but the Turf siblings are 0 for 17 on the surface, and the Dam and the Sibs were primarily sprinters. So I landed on number 2, No Clouds, for Graham Motion.
Same as me.
20-1 is completely a pipe dream. There's no way. There's no way you're getting. There's no way that Graham Motion in the second career start off an impressive debut win is going to be the same price as a. I think the maiden in here is also 20-1. Patty Point.
And take a look at that female family too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Is a half to the grade 3 winning Dynamic Holiday on the turf. This one is bred to just want to go long on the turf, and she's a pretty big looking filly that looks like she should stretch out. And I just think maybe the best we can hope for is a third of that morning line price, which I'd still be okay with.
6-1, I think.
Wow.
I would still even nibble there. Yeah, I just think I trust Motion implicitly with this stuff.
Here's the negative from the formulator. Last 5 years at Woodbine, he's only 2 for 33. So
not great, but he's
0
one
for
of those
7
trainers
this year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I can put trust in despite a stat. If we get anything resembling a price, Bob, where did you end up in here if forced to make a selection or two?
A couple of horses. Yeah, there's 3 horses I like in here. I really like Karen, and if Karen's 4-1, Karen, I think Karen's one of those fillies. She's kind of more like a 3-year-old now. She's really, really mature. She's a total pro. She doesn't mind a scrap. And, drew the rail.
Great
obviously
trip
live.
Yeah.
Jockey trainer. Yeah, works extremely professionally. She's just a total professional 2-year-old racehorse,
Right.
This is her home track. Sire, pretty interesting, really. You got the Sadler's Wells, on the top side of that. That not impossible. A very stout pedigree, and the Vilsack doesn't hurt for turf routing. I think she just might be looking at her. She looks like a pretty stylish and flashy 2-year-old, and you look at the sales price of $45,000. That's actually, she must have been pretty impressive, because that's a pretty nice chunk of change for the kind of horse that would really sort of you'd expect to sell for much less than that. But that's reading way too much into her past. Her present's really impressive. She's 3 for 3 on the synth, and I think she's probably going to be just as good on grass. I like her. I really like Gio Ponte as a first crop stallion.
Yeah.
I think that I haven't seen one run badly myself, and this one's out of a good old lazy lane mare, Camise, which isn't that French for the shirts you're wearing. And Secret of Love, you can't fault her lone try on turf. She kind of beat whatever was behind her. She gets Lasix. I think she's pretty live. And then I think
so
it's
too.
really worth noting Catch a Glimpse. Catch a Glimpse has a beautiful juvenile turf pedigree, City Zip out of an Irish River mare. And I think it's kind of notable that Mark Cassie skipped a condition here. I don't know if he got word from the racing office that it was a soft, no conditions allowance race or what, but, boy, did she put together a professional effort. I'm sure there was at least a few winners in there amongst her 6 rivals, I thought that was a pretty impressive run. So for me, I'm all 139. I agree with you guys. I think that No Clouds is going to be a much shorter price, but to me, that doesn't mean that she'll hit the board. So, but obviously it's a tough race. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the horse.
The favorite.
He's got the 85 buyer on the outside. Right. Yeah.
Well, actually, no. I think the favorite is the 4.
The morning line favorite, right? The Josie Carroll, who looks, I think, to. I don't think that's necessary. I think there's probably a logic to that the horse. Yeah. The horse who closed impressively in a race with a lot of apparent speed. Right. But yeah, Reed Baker on the outside with all that speed. I just it seemed to me that was a little bit maybe a little bit of a walk on the lead for the distance from She'll Do It. And I was going to hope something else ran with her early and set up for one of the others.
The concern for me in the second career start, is the 5 furlongs to 8 furlong stretch out. At a short price.
Then you get to look. definitely looking for fillies that would want a mile in this type of race, and I think with a bunch of potential sprinters in here, we can assume that the pace is going to be demanding. So I think that's one of the reasons why I like the 1. I think that she will lay close because she's such a pro and sit a nice trip behind whatever kind of duel develops. And but I like the 3. And I'm not going to fault you guys. You guys, I mean, Henry the Navigator out of a fantastic Dynaformer mare. It's probably the most well-bred horse in the race, but whether or not she's ready to
first against winners is tough.
Like you're saying, yeah, and obviously 20 to 1. I mean, that's why I like this Karen horse for the experience. Just obviously not on grass, but just the 3 races under her belt.
Yeah.
And
anytime you have a horse who's won 3 races going against a lot of them who are only running their second race, there is, like you said, that sort of an inherent advantage there. For me, it's all about the betting. At the morning line price, I'd sign on. Yeah. If she becomes sort of the hot horse and gets bet down much below that, I might be tempted to get more creative. But she'd certainly be an A for me.
And we haven't even mentioned the best name in the race.
Who's that?
Chinchilla Dust. Right?
Pulled the goalie.
Chinchilla Dust.
Pulled the goalie.
Pulled the goalie's good. I was just disappointed that Pulled the Goalie was not a Canadian bred. Although at least she is running in Canada.
At least she is running at Woodbine. Right. Yeah, she is running at Woodbine. Yeah, Chinchilla Dust. I'll tell you what, I'm sure you saw plenty of winners by Freud up on the Saratoga grass, didn't you there, Peter? I mean,
had a great meet.
Obviously an excellent, really, really top New York turf sire. It's a tough race, and you got to land somewhere. You got to have an opinion somewhere. So I'm 193. I love this pedigree on this. I love City Zip out of an Irish River mare for a 2-year-old filly, and Florent Giroux riding for Cassie for the first time, that catches the eye.
Yeah, it's interesting. With the 4 stakes down at Kentucky Downs, and he's 6 for 10 now at Kentucky Downs with the races being canceled yesterday. It's interesting that he's flying up to ride at Woodbine instead of riding at, there's nearly $2 million of purse money at stake on Saturday, but he chooses to go to Woodbine and ride for Cassie.
Doug Bradar, his agent, is a well-known contest player as well, and definitely knows what he's doing. He's done a great job with that book.
Right.
So
it's interesting.
That's one where I would defer towards thinking they know what they're doing.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And where I don't know which other
Doug's obsession, perhaps a public handicap or handicapping contest has taken him too far here. I mean, he wants his jock in 2 races in the public handicap races. Like you said, instead of blowing off millions of dollars at Kentucky Downs for what a maiden run for 120 grand there. So I don't know, Doug. I mean, I hope the Zip man comes through in the next race for you.
Before we descend into total madness, let's move on to that next race in Public Handicapper. We're talking about the Grade 2 Summer, also at Woodbine, also a mile. This is the Colts version of that race. Bob, we're going to make you start us off this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Hammer's Vision. You saw the Saratoga Special.
Yep.
He ran a pretty good race. I mean, that was a pretty good effort.
Absolutely.
And then he was really, really sharp in his debut. So obviously this is a horse that's, by a winner of the Breeders' Cup Mile, an upset winner of the Breeders' Cup Mile at that. Who's a new stud, who's, obviously completely unexposed as a stallion. He might turn out to be a really good stud. There's no reason why the Son of Galt shouldn't be, and as a good miler. Brian Lynch, very capable trainer, wins his fair share at Woodbine. There's no doubt about that. He adds Lasix, and he's working sharp. Eurico da Silva doesn't bother me at all. Look at him; he's 24% here. Obviously, the switch from Rosario to da Silva is not a big deal at all to me. I think that's just fine. I really like the horse. I think this horse is ready to go a mile on the grass at Woodbine. And so that's where I land. I have respect. I mean, of the 2 Barbara Minshew runners, I like Hollywood Hideaway a little bit better. Conquest Daddy-O interests me. I think he has a really nice turf pedigree. He'll get on it for the first time. he's run a couple of nice races. He was very game in the Vandal, chasing home what's that, Ruthless Blue. But no, my money lands on Hammer's Vision from the 5-hole. A lot of things in his favor.
I can't get a pick in edgewise today. That's exactly who I would have talked about if I was going first. And I agree. The special run was good. That was a fast pace that favored horses from coming off it. I thought Hammer's Vision had kind of a subtle, good middle move to get up into contention in a race that was won from farther back. And I think with the way, again, not unlike the Natalma that we were talking about in here, you've got a lot of horses coming from sprints, presumably a faster pace, and maybe De Silva just tries to settle and make conserve some ground and make one run and should have a really nice setup. Mike, where did you end up in here?
So I mentioned one that, Bob, you mentioned just briefly, and it's of the two Barbara Minshall runners, both of whom are owned by Bruce Lunsford. I landed on number 2, Hollywood Hideaway. Yeah. Nothing wrong about the debut. Of course, was elevated to the victory via DQ. The horse that beat came back to win. And then as the favorite against the Zip Zip man, just kind of ran evenly, but ran like a horse that seems like they're going to appreciate the extra. He's going to appreciate the extra distance. I think they got the morning line flopped. I think Hollywood Hideaway will be the lower of the two Minshall runners, and maybe 8-1, 6-1.
I agree.
Probably about the right price. Mm-hmm. And from a pedigree standpoint, I don't know about Sensational as a turf sire, but is half to Aravale, who was a really good turf stakes winner, and so the pedigree's there to appreciate the stretch out, and I think we'll appreciate getting back on the turf.
Yeah, those are.
What about the morning line here on the 4? What's the deal?
Well, right.
What is the deal with
Talk
that?
about a story.
I mean, I'm a morning line odds maker. I'm not going to crab morning line odds makers because I'm currently doing the morning line for quarter horse racing here at Prairie Meadows. It's no easy task, but we can assume there's going to be far more money in the pools at Woodbine on Saturday,
right,
than Prairie Meadows on Saturday night for quarter horse racing. 3-1 on a first-time starter
in a grade 2.
I mean, what do you guys think about that? Yeah,
I think there's a story.
Is this the talk of the backstretch of sorts?
Yeah, because these morning line makers have such a difficult job, and especially with firsters.
See the clocker?
Well, it could be, or just ear to the ground kind of stuff. Either some talk directly to the clocker, or some, how some horses just get this buzz about them. So, I mean, maybe, I don't even know who makes the line at Woodbine, but you see this maiden entered and you start asking questions about it, and, you hear 2 people say, this is the fastest horse who ever lived, and you don't take it seriously, but that means the horse is going to take money, so you hang a number on there. I mean, it seems incredibly aggressive, but I can only guess that's what's happening there.
Well, right, and I think maybe...
Yeah,
go ahead, Bob.
Who is Conquest Stables? I've never...
They've been spending an awful lot of money, an absolute ton of money in the last couple of years at the sales.
Yeah, I don't know who's
behind it. Who are they? Do you know?
I forget the fellow's name.
I haven't read a little story, and there must have been a story on them somewhere. Yeah.
But they've got a lot of horses. They ran a lot at Saratoga. He does this harness racing thing of putting his name in there, which I don't love. But
I know, yeah. Yeah. Armbro Enforcer.
But they've been everywhere.
Or the Warrens horses in Southern California. Yeah. But I think the other thing around this horse is you gotta look long and hard. Okay, Mark Casse, obviously, especially at Woodbine, doesn't make a habit of spotting horses in a place where they don't have a shot. So just right there, the fact that he's willing to debut a horse in a graded stakes makes you look twice. I mean, if this were Gennady Dorochenko, for instance, you might say, okay,
we'll
whatever.
get to him in a bit.
Yeah. But I don't know. I haven't looked, but I don't know how many times Casse has debuted a horse in a stakes race, let alone a graded stakes race.
No, me either.
So there's that the morning line maker's probably taking a look and saying, okay, that's weird, and then maybe combined with the buzz, and you see with a closer look, it notes that he was working with a stakes winner, Wild Catamine, and so maybe there's a story there around it. And I think it also speaks to how wide open this field is. If a first-time starter is going to be one of the 2 or 3 choices in the wagering, that's the kind of race I love,
Ernie Samersky's
and he's going to find. Oh, this is a great betting race.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
I'll send around. I'll tweet around an
first-time
article and
starter,
tag you guys.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, learning is everything, but I think we picked the morning line guys brain enough at Woodbine. But Manhattan Dan is a fast horse. I mean, this Manhattan Dan, he's going to be 10. I mean, he's going to blaze a trail in here, you'd think. Emma Jane Wilson, she's a great rider. I don't think the horse is going to win, but and of course the Zip Zip Man. I mean, for fans of Buyer Speed figures. And there's, what bothers me about the Zip Zip Man, and tell me if your research is similar, Mike. I don't see too much turf action on the dam side. I might be sort of like overanalyzing. But Strut the Canary, this mineshaft mare, does not look particularly turfy to me.
Right.
Sounds dirty.
Right. Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, if this horse were a price, it's the kind of thing I'm willing to overlook. But if this horse is the favorite and a legitimate one at that, that's especially as a 2-year-old that's never tried the surface, never tried the distance, those are ones I want to bet against.
Before we move on to the Sands Point, Mike, I want to ask you a question. Do you think we have license to run long today?
Yes.
Okay. I think we'll run a little long then, because otherwise we'd have to cram the last 2 races into 10 minutes, which, while it could be done, I'm enjoying the sort of fuller discussion we've been able to have.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to talk about in the Sands Point, especially because we have a bunch of shippers in here from overseas. And just my first sort of tangential question, Bob, you mentioned going to races all around the world. I know you've done some writing about racing from around the world as well. What lessons about handicapping North American racing did you learn by looking at racing around the world?
Well, I mean, it's very valuable in a situation like today or on Saturday, Sands Point, when 3 of the contenders come from Great Britain. I've seen all 3 of them run. One significant thing is you got to know the nuances of the courses there. I think we'll find when we delve into the Sands Point that all 3 of these fillies are better going right-handed. I'm not looking at the form right now, but some of the best performances by a couple of them are at Goodwood, which is an incredibly tricky race course to navigate. So it's just knowledge of the. We have uphill finishes. We have flat courses over there. I don't mean we. I guess maybe I say we because I was up at 6 in the morning handicapping today's races from Doncaster and Chester.
Nice.
That's sort of like where it's where I do my betting. I sort of just feel like I have a better grip on racing over there. I've been to all 60 British race courses. Some of the best days of my life have been spent on British race courses. To me, it's just, and thankfully in this day and age, we can bet on all those races. I mean, I can bet on a 3.5-mile steeplechase from Sedgefield. So 10 years ago I couldn't, or 10 years ago I had to have a friend open up a special. Then they stopped that. It's been a bit tricky getting a bet down in England over the last 20 years when you're in this country, but now it's not. So yeah, at this time of year, I can tell you this much, as we're about to handicap the Sands Point, the 3-year-old British fillies aren't as good as they usually are. That's why I'm the kind of guy that normally would be beating the drum for all 3 of these horses, and I think a lot of these are using this with an eye towards going in that Queen Elizabeth race at Keeneland next, seeing sort of where they stand. But I think we have pretty good 3-year-old fillies on the grass in this country this year. So basically, it's sort of like knowledge of form. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Miss Temple City, I bet on her. I thought she was a steal at 50-1, and I still can't believe she didn't finish in the top 3. I think that if she'd had a rider that had more experience at Ascot, then she would have finished in the top 3. I had 100 to place on her, and she finished 4th.
Oh, tough beat.
but that's just a me and John Velasquez thing.
Well, I'll pick up right
no,
on that thread because I
just can't
love
catch
Johnny, and I don't. I try not to be in the habit of
Yeah.
knocking jockeys. I also have to question a little bit the ride in the Lake Placid, where I just thought she was park wide throughout, and I thought was clearly better than Sentiero Italia when you factor in the extra ground cover. Now, granted, I didn't corroborate that with the GPS, but it sure looked to me like she was best that day, and I had a fairly large bet on her, and after it was one of those funny situations. I was sitting next to what I call a sore winner in the paddock bar, someone who'd bet Sentiero Italia, and we talked a little bit about the race beforehand. But Mr. Sore Winner, I've never seen this one before. He was after the race hurled his program at the screen, Harvey Pack style, and said, "See, I told you." Yeah. And my response to him was,
"Oh,
pal,
wow."
Yeah. I said, "Look, pal, Sentiero Italia will never finish in front of Miss Temple City again."
Wow.
So I'm sticking with that read.
So this,
I'm sticking.
This Sands point is kind of personal for you. I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a grudge match.
I've got a formula. I got a trainer stat that might back that up too.
Let's hear it.
Last 4 years, turf route graded stakes with last out winners, Kieran McLaughlin, 0 for 19.
Okay.
Only 4 of them hit the board.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Of those Euros, and Bob, I want you to tell me.
Because she looks great on paper.
You're right.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I was, that was me dealing with an aggressive person saying that. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with it. I do like Miss Temple City better, but I wouldn't necessarily take those words to the bank.
Yeah, I wouldn't back down. Don't you back down. And I want you to find that guy when Miss Temple City beats Sierra Italia.
See, I
There'll
told
probably be
you.
a Belmont at the bar there. Yeah, exactly. In your face, bro.
I'll be sitting here at this very desk.
Please do.
Yes.
Please do.
Yeah, I'll quickly go through the Euros. Blonde me, Andrew Balding's a great trainer. He reaches for the Lasix, which is, somewhat notable. This Sandown is a right-handed, in fact, they were running there earlier today. It's a right-handed course that typically favors front runners. So the fact that she's able to close ground at Sandown and Salisbury, which is also a right-handed course, and Windsor, which is the only time she's raced left-handed is at Newbury, which is a large, mostly flat left-handed track. But her performances at Windsor, Salisbury, and Sandown suggest that she is a very capable filly, and at 10-1, I think she could hit the board. Mick Channon, who trains Malabar the 8, he's in particularly good form at the moment. Sylvester de Souza, who won the Group 3 race at Goodwood on our last time, is going to be champion rider in Great Britain this year if he doesn't get injured here. And in fact, he's pretty far out in front. She fits in here. All 3 of these fillies fit. They're all like Group 3 English fillies this year. Osela is probably the most talented of the group, the 9 horse. She picks up Castellano. Richard Hannon was the champion trainer last year over there. She's a very nice filly. But if you look at what's the best filly in England and Ireland this year, it's Legatissimo, who won the 1,000 guineas, and Osela's 11 lengths behind her in that race. And I think they are what they are. I don't think any of them are Group 1 horses at all. And I think that, it's interesting that Bejarano's on the 8, and, these are all ridden by American riders. So, no British, and it's St. Ledger weekend, and it's Irish Champion weekend over there. So you can see why a lot of their bigger riders would stay put, although David Probert elects to stay home instead of coming over to partner Blonde Me. So I just think that even if you look at a long shot, I think Cara Maria is kind of a live long shot in here.
Lost Bob for a second. He'll be right back though.
Right back.
Layoff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's some angles there. My one comment on the English, the English-based fillies. I thought on the tape, and I actually found on YouTube so that anybody can see it. The last run from Malabar. I'm going to tweet around a link, and it's a long chunk. You have to fast forward. I'll put in the tweet that I send around where to fast forward to. I just thought visually that was very impressive. I thought she looked handy and looked to me like she'd benefit from running in American racing, and also looks like one with the headgear last time where the penny might have dropped. Of the Euros, she's the one I'm the most interested in, especially if we can get that kind of price.
Yeah, and I don't know. Do you have any stats on Mick Channon coming over here? It's very unusual, I think, for him coming over. So that also, I mean, Andrew Balding comes, and he especially comes to Woodbine, and Richard Hannon generally sends at least a couple to the Breeders' Cup. So the fact that I think it is sort of notable that Mick Channon sends a filly over here, and obviously there's a lot of reasons too, but he probably thinks that this filly's good enough to contend in races like the Sands Point and then the Queen Elizabeth race at Keeneland. So they all bear watching. They all can win the race, but I'm not crazy about any of them. But I think her eminency is improving. Who's your number one pick in here, Mike?
Well, for me, the question becomes the betting and who ends up going favored. I think Osceola is probably going to be the shortest of the three, which leans me more towards Malabar and Blonde Me. If Miss Temple City gets overlooked, which I'm not sure she will, she becomes interesting at or above that morning line. But I think she'll get bet. I think, I think Sentiero Italia will get bet. I think Osceola will get bet, which I think will help prices on the others in here. So, I don't know. I'm certainly not enough of a student of European racing to know if they're good enough to beat what we've got over here. But I also think that this isn't really our best 3-year-old fillies showing up in this race. Miss Temple City is a nice one, but she's
the one's still running. Who's better than Miss Temple City and Sentiero Italia?
What about the rider? What about the rider on the 3-horse?
Yeah, well, it's obviously notable that Stevens is flying out for the mount, and it's also notable too that Bejarano is choosing to ride Malabar, considering he's ridden Her Eminency the last couple races. I don't know. I don't know if there's a story there.
It's kind of interesting. He's 0 for 2 riding for Stidham, so it's not like it's a regular thing for him to ride for Stidham,
Right. Of the Americans, the one that kind of interests me a little bit, partly because I think she'll be overlooked, and anytime you get Chad Brown at a price in these kinds of races, he can be deadly. Mrs. McDougall. Mrs. McDougall has done little wrong. American Oaks was the only time she really didn't run her best race. But it was a tough spot, and I'm not sure. Southern California at the shipping was really, the best spot for her. She's improving. She'll be probably a nice price. She's of the Americans the one I would land on here, and I don't need to read Chad's numbers in these kinds of spots to let you know that his horses are live.
Looks like one of those races that you handicap and you end up playing 5 horses in your vertical plays and stuff like that. You feel like you got it covered, and then the 12-horse higher Mayo wins and pays $53.
Right.
I mean,
right. Yep.
I mean, it's a French filly. No, it's a wildly unexposed French filly. We don't know anything about her. She's beautifully bred, and she's never tried a stakes race in her life. She just wins by 4 under a hard hold. I mean, so it's a fantastic race. I mean, it's a really, I love these 3-year-old filly turf races in the autumn. I think that they're really cool. I think you get horses from all over this country and all over Europe. I mean, they come over because this is $500,000, and then that thing at Keeneland's got to be $500,000 too. This is really a way to take a Group 3 filly and make a lot of money. I mean,
QE2's
I
also
can't
a great
fault
one.
Marabia.
Yeah,
exactly. And look at this. Look at this race I haven't watched the replay, but what about the race the 1-horse ran? Marabia.
Right.
I mean, that was a slow pace from the inside. She's dead last, and she just flew home. So I mean, she's cool too. So I don't know. It's a
lot of ways
cool
to go.
race.
There'll be people throwing up the all ball there. I'm going to press Miss Temple City
Yeah,
and use
no,
Malabar a little and try to get away with it. Let's move
you
on
and
to
Miss Temple City,
the
it's
Kentucky
first.
Turf Cup, the Grade 3
I love that.
at one of our favorite tracks, Kentucky Downs. Let me also put in a quick plug. If
You
folks
ever
are
cash a bet there?
not too often, honestly, it's not easy.
I did all right there last meet.
Yeah,
last year.
good luck.
I want to put in a quick plug for their
Congratulations.
handicapping contest this weekend.
Yeah.
They have a $150 buy-in contest with 2 NHC seats,
Wow.
a BCBC seat, and cash on the line. And it's a little bit different. It's just $150 to buy in, and you have to do a $2 win place bet on each of the races at Kentucky Downs on Saturday. So it's a chance. I think it's a great chance for newer players who maybe don't know, who haven't played in live bankroll events, or don't have that experience, or it's pretty simple. You basically just have to pick one horse in every race, and for 150 buy-in, have a very good chance to get to the NHC. It's a or BCBC.
What are the
So it's
caps on that? Is it
it's a
20 to 1
cap.
Is it a 20 to 1 cap?
Yep, 20 to 1
Okay.
cap on the win.
That's
and
notable because it sounds like the kind of contest that 2 winners might win it for you.
absolutely.
You know, 2 20 to 1 winners might win it.
Because with what the field size is there, and of course it's just, if you're playing in the contest or you're not playing in the contest, it's just a good opportunity to look at turf racing with full fields and low takeout. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Not to mention rain softened ground.
That's right.
They
It's been
canceled
raining
there
there a
yesterday
bunch.
because a couple of boggy spots. And yeah, I don't know what the weather's like between now and Saturday, but I think you have to look at soft ground performances. And,
For sure. Now, what
you could probably upgrade them.
I bet you there's some other analogies to be made. I mean, but I'm curious specifically what analogies you would make to handicapping races at Kentucky Downs vis-a-vis your experience following English racing so closely. What is there? Is there anything particular you've noticed about Kentucky Downs that to try to something you might be able to see in the PPs of a horse typically running at other tracks in the United States that you might say, ooh, this horse might be suited to Kentucky Downs because of X, Y, or Z?
I've been there many times. I first started going there when it was the dueling grounds. I claimed a horse there one time called Drink Bubbly for $10,000. It was kind of interesting. I'd had her earlier in the year, and I wanted to claim her back. And this is way back when, and we found out she was in, and we drove like 90 miles an hour to get down there from Louisville. It's like 3 hours. And we got there 18 minutes to post, and we had our claim slip all filled out. And I was like, "Where's the claim box?" And at the time, the state steward in Kentucky was a guy called Bernie Heddle. And they're like, "Well, you got to find Bernie Heddle." I said, "Where is he?" So he's cruising around on a golf cart. I said, well, where's the claim box? He said, the claim box is his breast pocket of his shirt. So we found him like 16 minutes to post. We found him. I saw him like 100 yards away, and we ran over to him and stuck the envelope in his pocket. And she won the race. It was like a 10-on-3 with a $10,000 purse. Now that would be like a $62,000 purse or something. And we got her back, and then we ran her at Keeneland next out. She ran second to some Carl Bowman trained horse at Pat Day won on 3-5, and she got claimed by Calabrese off us for 17.5. So in the end, it was all a happy ending. But
nice win.
Times have changed there. Back to your original question, times have changed there, my friend. I mean, this place was designed to be like kind of a sort of a neat steeplechase course in the middle of nowhere, and obviously these machines they put in there, what do they call them, instant racing machines? I don't even know what's there now, but $120,000 maidens. I mean, the stakes races have always been good pots. I mentioned Tony Reinstetter earlier. His grand old gelding Yakthan worked wonders on the turf course there. I think it sort of takes. I think it's unique. I think really more so than looking for European horses, you got to look for decent performances on the course. And also, like you were noting earlier, Weiss Florent Giroux, Woodbine, when he's got 6 out of 9 wins or whatever at Kentucky Downs, he obviously knows what's going on that turf course right now. He knows the right place to be. Mm-hmm. So I think if you've got experience riding this meet over the course, that's pretty key, especially since they had so much rain yesterday that they had to cancel before they even got started. So it is kind of a minefield right now, but I would say course experience is way more as valuable as it ever gets. And then And then I'm not a huge jockey bettor, but I would say Kentucky Downs is a place where you want to follow jockeys who've had success in the past and during this meet. You can have horses come from 20, 30 lengths back because riders sort of misjudge when to send. And you'll get like paces that are way too quick. You'll think you'll bound like 5 in front at the quarter pole and finish 7th there. I mean, it's
right.
It's very, very
uphill
unusual.
finish. We talked about uphill finishes before too.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, I mean, I think that European horses who've done well over courses with undulations, sure, that might be a slight advantage, but Kentucky Downs is like wildly unique. So I would move up performances on the course.
Does that mean does that put you in PowerPed's corner here? I think the lone entrant with a win over Kentucky Downs, or where did you end up going here for the Kentucky Turf Cup?
I ended up on the Big Hoss. Maker. I mean, how many times has Mike Maker claimed a horse for somewhere between 15 and 50,000 over the last 10 years, and the horse became a good stakes horse. And
he's got 3 of them in this race, right? Didn't he claim all 3 of these?
Exactly. I believe so. And this one, I think, is the best of the 3. And we're talking about morning lines. I'd love to get 8-1 on the Big Hoss. I mean, as far as 12 furlong pedigrees U.S. ones go, Lemon Drop Kid out of a Touch Gold mare is pretty cool. You know, Belmont top and bottom here. And it's a horse to win machine. So the fact that he's got proven ability at a bunch of different courses. Maker, of course, he wins here. He knows the key, and I think he's got his horses primed. You know, he knows the difference between 30,000 and 300,000 as much as anybody in the game. You know, so I like him. And then I'll turn it over to you guys. I've really been blabbering, but I've got a lot of respect for Hyper. What a cool horse he is. You know, he's a really cool horse. But my money would go on to Big Hoss.
Well, that makes sense. Hyper is an interesting one. I think he's just a real grinder, and as quick as the pace was early in the Ledger, it might just not have suited him, and he ended up having to come wide. Very logical favorite. I mentioned PowerPed. I love the win over the course there. I feel like he could be the best closer. I like that pedigree too, with the Black Miniloosh mare and Power Scored on the top. But I'm going to mention an old friend, a horse I've talked about on the show many times, and hasn't yet won for me on the show. But I just have my entire formulator screen is filled with excuses for St. Albans Boy. And I wonder if, talk about a grinder, another horse who might benefit from the unique configuration. And he doesn't have speed in the UK sense. You know, he doesn't have anything resembling a turn of foot. He's very one pace and he grinds. Maybe an uphill finish will help him find the 2 to 3 lengths that he needs to be a player in here. Not one that I necessarily am going to be weighting heavily on top, but certainly one I feel like could hit in underneath here at a big price and make something happen. Those were the 3 I was going to be looking at the most in here. Mike, what did you come up with?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The Mike Maker enters 3 in this race, and you talk about success at Kentucky Downs. He's one of the trainers that's actually done really well there. You know, conversely, Steve Asmussen's Dramedy, who has won at the distance. Granted, it was at Keeneland and it was on good turf, but that was before he went into Asmussen's barn. I was surprised. Asmussen, last 5 years at Kentucky Downs, he's 1 for 28.
Wow, that's big. See, that's huge.
It is. It's very big. And you know, conversely, Maker obviously has a lot of success. What I was most notable for me of the 3 is that Leparoux, who'd ridden 2 of the 3, and who Maker has had a ton of success with, especially lately. 16 for 40 in the past 6 months in turf routes with the 2 of them together. 16 for 40. That's insane.
It's a big number.
And Leparoux obviously knows how to ride at Kentucky Downs, does arguably, or maybe not even arguably, statistically is a much better rider in Kentucky than anywhere else. It was notable that he shows up on Roman Approval. who I think is playable at 6-1 because this is a wide open field. St. Albans boy, I think his style is he's a grinder. He's not a stone closer, but he's not a horse that's usually at the lead. He's just the kind of horse that's going to appreciate, I think, the stretch out and probably appreciate the unusual course. I'm kind of with you, Pete. I don't know if he's good enough to win, but at the odds, he's a little interesting to me. And of course, Power Pet is another one along those lines that I think is going to appreciate the strange course and the increased distance. And Hyper's a really cool horse, but as your favorite, he hasn't won in a couple years. He's one I probably would play against on top, but use underneath.
All right, guys, we could go on and on here, and we kind of have gone on and on, but we could go on and on a lot more.
Well, we should do this again, Bob. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I loved having the music stuff is fun. I love talking to you about UK racing. I alluded to this trip that I'm taking next week. I'm going to be in the UK for 16 weeks, and high on the agenda.
Wow.
I'm not going to get to your record of all 60 courses, but I'm going to get to a lot. You're going to be
20 years. That's 20 years.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But you're going to be, you may be blocking my calls. I'm going to be bothering you so much for information since you made the mistake of letting me know that you look at this stuff every day.
Anytime. I get up every morning. I listen to the pundits on William Hill Radio. Those guys are like my friends. I love those guys. It's really great coverage. And, it's just, anytime you have any question, I love the British game. The Irish spit tricky. A lot of tricks up their sleeves. There's no doubt about that. But it's just a great way to start the day. I mean, what's better? In this day and age, you can start the day betting on British races, bet on American races all the way through, and then finish your before you go to bed betting Australia and racing from Asia. I mean, you can bet around the clock.
Many years ago,
if you're a horse racing fan,
it's a golden age.
Yeah, many years ago, yes, you had to drive. This is the greatest. I mean, you had to drive 4 hours to get to a racetrack if you live 4 hours away from one. That's the only way you could get a bet down. So this is a fantastic way of life we have in America.
I will do a tale from the track at some point. That's a segment we have on the show, Bob, where we do sort of a standalone Shaggy Dog story about something from our days. I will do one about the Betathon, which was a project I engaged in, partnered with DRF years ago, where I did bet as many races as I could in a 24-hour period. It was a blast.
Wow.
But all right, I just want to one more quick plug.
One more quick plug, Pete.
One more quick plug. Folks should check out the webinar we did this week with Randy Moss on the Moss Pace Figures. That was a ton of fun. You can find it on the YouTube channel. Maybe I'll have Michael tweet that out again. I'm going to tweet out that replay and the article about the contest guy. So follow us on Twitter for all that stuff. Bob, what's your Twitter handle for people who want to follow you?
At B Nastanovich. Nastanovich. Straightforward.
Excellent.
So can I tell my Minutemen story now?
Oh, please.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. We'll save that for next time.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We'll always make time for the Minutemen.
I've got a really. I'll give. It's a great one, but it's got a little length to it, and I don't want to leave out any of the details.
We'll save it. We'll leave them wanting more.
You'll have to be back. We'll leave that club in the bag. We'll also. I can tell some Mike Watts stories too.
But I'm thinking maybe Champions Day, have you on as a special guest for. We'll have to see if we can figure out the technology with two of us via Skype. But
love it.
Champions Day or the ARC, we could have you on or get a word in from you at least. It's a great perspective to have. So, all right, that's enough of this. Thank you so much for checking out the DRF. You have some closing words,
Bob? Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Oh, cheers, man.
Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
So for Bob Nastanovich, for Mike Hogan, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. Until the next time, may you win all your photos.